Last name? Yeah, Elmima. She was my first program manager. Okay, so y'all are listening to me now. Okay, so I'd like to introduce our lunchtime speaker. Patricia B. Campbell is president of Campbell-Kibler Associates, Incorporated, and has been involved in STEM educational research and evaluation with a focus on issues of race, ethnicity, and gender since the mid-'70s. Her BS from Lemoyne College is in mathematics, her MS from Syracuse University is in instructional technology, and her PhD, also from Syracuse, is in teacher education. Dr. Campbell is formerly an associate professor of research, measurement, and statistics at Georgia State University, and she has authored more than 100 publications, including co-authoring The Effect of Context on Student Engagement in Engineering, Building Evaluation Capacity, What Do We Know? Seeking Effective Math and Science Education, and Good Schools in Poor Neighborhoods, Defying Demographics, Achieving Success, with Beatrice Chu Kluel, and Engagement and Capacity and Continuity, a trilogy for student success and upping the numbers using research-based decision-making to increase diversity in the quantitative sciences, with both Eric Jolly and Leslie Perlman. An Association for Women in Science Fellow, she received the Betty Vedder Research Award from the Women in Engineering Program Advocates Network and the Willie Stein Goodstill Award from the American Educational Research Association. Dr. Campbell's professional activities have been extremely diverse, ranging from doing training in educational evaluation and research in South Africa and Uganda to serving as an expert witness in the sex discrimination case brought against the Citadel. Please join me in welcoming Pat Campbell.
Thank you, Deb. So I have the lavalier mic. Yes, the lavalier mic is on, although I have to tell you, with my voice, it tends not to be a problem. Give me a stadium and I can fill it. So I would just like to complain a little bit, because this is the third lunch speech I've done in a week that's been dealing with broadening participation in STEM. So either we're getting a whole lot more attention about broadening participation, or this is a plot to stop me from eating lunch. So just let me know. I actually picked a couple of cookies out, so I should be good. Okay, I wanted to start by kind of telling a personal story, because I think it's a personal story that has a lot of implications when we're talking about impediments, and we're talking about impediments to diversity. As you can tell, both from the bio that Bev gave and by looking at me, I'm old. I am so old. How old are you? I'm not telling. If you can't figure it out from the story, you're not going to know. But I am so old that when I was making plans about where to go to college, it was way before Title IX. Title IX is the law that was passed in 1972, clue, Bev. That was passed in 1972 that forbid sex discrimination in programs and schools receiving federal funds. So, okay, I really wanted to be an engineer. I thought being an engineer would be a really good idea. I was at New York State, and I had a New York State scholarship that would only work in New York State. Back in the day, okay, I graduated in '65. So back in the day, so it's 1964, and I'm looking for a place in New York State. You notice I'm saying New York State, big state, lots of schools. I'm looking for a place in New York State where I can go and become an engineer. My choices are extremely limited. My choices were so limited that basically I could go to RPI, but they weren't going to let me live on campus. You know, girl distraction stuff. I could also go to Cooper Union, but at that point, Cooper Union didn't have dorms. And I was this, you know, not yet 17-year-old from the country, and the idea of going to New York City, finding my own apartment, and going to school was a little intimidating. So I didn't. I took the next choice and went to Lemoyne College and got an undergrad degree in math with a minor in physics. So I'm not an engineer now. That may be good, that may be bad. The way I was in topology, it was good I wasn't a theoretical engineer. But then when we're thinking about it and we're thinking about impediments, then there's kind of a couple of things that are going on. Obviously, I didn't want it badly enough, because if I had wanted it badly enough, I would have lived off campus and gone to RPI, or I would have, God help me, gotten a small apartment in Hell's Kitchen and went across to the East River all the time. So, all right, part of when we're thinking about impediments is people may say, well, you know, somebody should have done something to make her want it more. But on the other hand, from a more institutional perspective, somebody also might say, wow, there were a lot of external impediments there. And that perhaps things should have been done to make institutions more welcoming to her. And so when we're talking about impediments, I think it's very important for us to think a lot about the interaction of impediments. That most of our effort, as people have talked about for the last couple of days, including me, we've talked a lot about, quote, fixing students, about preparing students, about making students able to take it. And that's really important. But if that's all we do, then nothing's going to change. And I hate to do it, but I'm going to have to tell my babies in the Hudson River story. All right. I'm not exactly sure where this story originally came from. I swore it came from my daughter. My daughter swears she heard it from me first, but I don't think so. Okay, so there are three people who are walking down the Hudson River, and the current's going downstream. And they turn and they look into the river. And there are babies in the river. And one of the people jumps in the river immediately and starts throwing babies out of the water. The second person jumps in the river and starts teaching babies how to swim. The third person, without breaking stride, does a U-turn and starts running upstream as fast as they can. And the two people in the water start yelling, wait, stop, what are you doing? Get back in here, there are babies in the water. And the person keeps running as fast as they can upstream and says, I'm going to find out who's throwing babies in the river, and I'm going to make them stop. Now, all three of those tasks are really important. But if nobody runs upstream and makes them stop throwing babies in the water, we're always going to be jumping into the river and trying to save babies. And so when we're talking about strategies to reduce impediments, when we're talking about overcoming barriers, absolutely, let's throw babies out of the river. Absolutely, let's teach babies how to swim. But never forget, we gotta stop people from throwing the babies in the first place. And I think when we're talking about overcoming impediments, we have got to look at all three areas. We can't stop, we've got to. Okay, so, and not to forget, one of those things that stops babies from being thrown in the river, or at least reduces the probability, is the law. If I had been 10 years younger, I would be an engineer. Because by the time 10 years passed, by 1975, Title IX had been passed, Title IX was being enforced, and based on the combination of the law, the attitude that led to that law, and more importantly, the economics of higher education, tons of schools in New York State had engineering programs where women were welcome. 10 years, a combination of the law change, a combination of attitude change, and a combination of economics. Again, a lot of interactions. So, what do we know? It's a little scary how much we know. And part of the reason is that it's scary is because there's stuff that we know, and we know really solidly, and it's really not expensive, and we're not doing it. Okay, so there's been a lot of talk about money and about the importance of money for students, financial aid, at the undergraduate level. So we know how to help get students, all students, get the financial aid they deserve. So a couple of years ago, the National Bureau of Economic Research did this awesome study. It was huge. It was like 40,000. They randomly assigned families to one of two groups. Both of them went to H&R Block. H&R Block, you're saying? Why? Because the treatment group, when they went to H&R Block to get their taxes done, H&R Block filled out their FAFSA form. Now, you should know, I live on a lake. We wanted to have a dock. I live in Massachusetts, so the form to fill out to get a dock was 25 pages. I gave up. We don't have a dock. Think about how many students, low-income students, their parents take one look at that form. And those of you who aren't administrators probably haven't looked at that form lately. It's scary. It's worse than the form I didn't fill out for the doc, and I fill out a lot of forms. So in this brilliant study, they said, okay, let's make H&R Block fill it out for them. And that will help them get in, and also that will give an estimate about how much college costs are going to be. It had a dramatic effect. More students applied for the student aid, more students enrolled in colleges among that random control group. It wasn't that expensive. It actually per person cost $87, but that included $20 for the tax professional and $20 for the participant. So if you scaled it up so that this was just something that H&R Block did, oh, would you like our extra FAFSA package? That's an extra $25. Everybody would make money, right? The system's all in place. I spent the last several days, because I knew about the study, but I hadn't followed up to see how much it was implemented. So I spent the last couple of days searching the web, and I'm good at Google. I can't find it. So we have this wonderful, wonderful strategy in place. No new infrastructure. Works, cheap. It's not there. I don't know why. I'm actually, when I get home, I am going to write letters to Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren is my senator, so I am going to write letters to Elizabeth Warren and say, how come this is being implemented? But that kind of question is something we need to think about, because this is an extreme example, but so many of the really cool, effective strategies that we actually test then don't get implemented. And this is a way to get low-income students who, heavens knows, are disproportionately African American, Hispanic, and Native American. This is a way to get them the money that they need to get. Okay, so here's part two. Part two is a more positive story in terms of long-term impact, one hopes. As you know, there's been all kinds of press in the last couple of months, maybe a year, about the issues about low-income students applying for and going to colleges that are not as competitive as the colleges that they should go into. And when people then look at the retention rates, the students, the low-income students who are highly achieving, have higher retention rates when they're in the more competitive colleges than when they're in the less competitive colleges. So the hypothesis is low-income students do better when there is a stronger academic match. So then there's a real question about how do you get highly achieving low-income students to apply to more competitive colleges? It's actually pretty easy. This year, the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, again, nicely randomly controlled, sent a packet of paper, about 75 sheets worth, to, what was this? This was, I don't know, thousands of kids. Half of them got the packet of paper. Did I mention it's just a packet of paper? The average cost per kid was $6, and that included postage. The packet of paper gave them information about colleges, about who gets accepted in highly effective colleges, about financial aid, about the approximate amounts of money that low-income kids have to pay, and gave them a paper voucher for free application fees. Now, the kids who didn't get the packet could still get a waiver of application fees, but they had to know to do it. So what happened? For these kids who were the more highly achieving low-income kids, 54% of the students gained admission to the college matching their academic qualifications, compared to 30% of the control group. Almost twice as many students were admitted to highly competitive colleges, and it cost $6 a student. Now, the good news is that starting this year, Delaware is going to do it. Delaware is a very small state. There are other states that may be bigger, that may want to consider it. Certainly, at the same time, College Board is going to send the waivers for applications to the top 15% of the SAT students who take the SAT, who are also in the lower 25%. That one hasn't been tested. I don't know what's going to happen if you just send application waivers. I don't understand where they're going to send, not sending the whole $6 package, but sending application waivers, which already exist, doesn't cost anything extra, along with information about financial aid, along with information about who goes to highly competitive colleges, makes a big difference. And it's doable. Okay, so I have more. We've talked a lot about math. I might point out, as Bev pointed out, I actually started in math. I love math. I particularly love applied math. We continue to make math a critical filter. And we know better. Do you know for how many years we've known how bad placement tests are? We pay money to make students take tests that we don't trust, that we often don't use, and that usually we supplement, math instructors usually supplement with their own tests. The Community College Resource Center, who's done a lot of research on this, actually finds if you're going to use one thing for math remediation, use high school GPA. It's a better predictor. If you use some kind of predictor test plus GPA, using, again, we're talking databases of 50 and 60,000 students. We're not talking about, I did this with 10 students yesterday. You can decrease the number of kids in math retention courses by 10 to 15%, keeping the same success rates, just by using either GPA or GPA and some kind of placement test. You know what that means in terms of cost. You know what that means in terms of the number of students who are retained. We know among our poorer students, and I mean lower income, I mean less experienced students, the longer they stay in remediation, the less apt they are to stay. One, they can't afford it. So one of the strategies that grew out of the bridge programs, but people do it without the bridge programs, Morgan State was in the beginning of this, is if students haven't taken a lot of math courses and aren't really, math whizzies, and even some that are, force them to take a review online something before they take the placement test. Now, if the placement test were a really good indicator of your mathematical skills and abilities, this shouldn't do a darn thing. Since it's not a good indicator of your mathematical skills and abilities, it's really effective. So if you're going to use the darn placement test, have the students go for a math review first. And one of the things so many schools know is math remediation courses teaching the same things in the same ways that the people didn't get in the first place. Guess what? They don't work. If you make them more individualized, if you make them more flexible, heck, the kids aren't getting credit for it anyway. So it's not like you've got all these requirements you've got to fulfill. If you make it so it's more individualized, if you make it so that kids can focus on those areas of weaknesses and not have to sit through the things they already know, not only are they less apt to drop out, but they're more apt to move on and be successful in their math courses, which is what we need. Now, just to depress you, I was involved with one program that did that, and their results were so dramatically positive that when the person who was spearheading it left for a semester, they sabotaged it, and it's now back to the original way. Yes. So just because it works doesn't mean people are going to accept it. Okay, one more. Another easy one. Spatial skills. All of the engineering people know how important spatial skills are. Hopefully, everyone in the room understands that spatial skills are not biologically determined. There have been many a year and many a people who think that you either got spatial skills or you don't. As with so many other things, practice. So you give the entering freshman engineering students a spatial skills test. I think you can get the Purdue for free, can't you? So you can get the Purdue for free, and it's online. You can put it on your own systems for $25. You can put it on your own course systems. And you give it to everybody. It's automatically scored. And then you find out whose spatial skills are really low. And guess what? You give them practice. And the next thing you know, your retention rate is higher. Why isn't everybody doing that? It's change. Sometimes we say change is hard. But this isn't hard change. Now, if you want to talk about hard change, that's about using teaching strategies that work. We know, I mean, my gosh, it's not just me. Those of us in the diversity and particularly educational research biz, we've been doing these kind of things forever. We know what works. We know what works for whom. We just don't apply it. And NSF, bless you NSF, funds us project after project after project to find out what works. And then we don't implement it. I mean, my favorite study on that, well, I'd say Uri Treisman. I mean, that Uri actually implements it, but it was 1972, 3, where Uri started doing his work, which showed that in calculus, when you had African American and Hispanic kids study in groups the way the white and the Asian kids were, they were as successful. It is now 2013. Why isn't that the case in every calculus class? High school, college, I don't care. We have known this for 41 years. And by the way, in those 41 years, lots of other people have done the research, redone the research. And I'll bet you if I wrote a proposal to NSF, there's a good chance for broadening participation, there's a good chance I get funded to do the research. Carl Wayner, his folks in the University of British Columbia did this fabulous study where they took, and this is small, but it's not about this, it's not about the teaching, it's about the mindset. They had an award-winning physics professor. Awards like mad for teaching. Okay, so he was teaching his traditional course, and they randomly assigned half the students to his class and half the students to a class that was taught by 2 inexperienced TAs. And they did it in a much more hands-on, not exactly project learning, because they didn't know enough about project learning, but more of a hands-on discussion kind of, we're in this together interactive way. You already know the results. Right, the inexperienced TA students did much better than the students of the eminent revered professor. Okay, here's the kicker. The response of the professor, okay, I understand what the data says, but I'm going to keep teaching the way that I teach. So what do we do about that? I don't know. I mean, I do, but it's hard, and we need to think about that. I think we need to think about ways that keep things, they stick. And so and before we think about scaling up, Carnegie Mellon, you all know the story about Carnegie Mellon. I mean, Carnegie Mellon was dramatically successful. In a 5-year period, they increased the percent of women in computer science from 7% to like 40%. What you don't know is when, and a great book, Unlocking the Clubhouse Door, was written. What you don't know is after the champions left, the numbers kind of sank because it didn't stick. Okay, so some of the things we know that didn't work, one of the things is we academic types are really good at the book that Karen said about the mistakes made, but they were not mine. They were the high school's mistakes. So I will work with the high schools. And if I can fix the high schools, I don't have to worry about even thinking about fixing myself. The bad news is, it doesn't work. Let's clean our own houses before we work to get others clean. Particularly since, by the way, we're the ones who are responsible for the training for those same teachers that we're going to go back and fix now that they're gone. You know, we broke them, and now we expect to get money to go fix the ones that we broke. It's probably a better strategy not to break them in the first place. But not to break them in the first place means we have to look at ourselves and our own teaching. And that's hard. And it's hard because we have to look at ourselves as individuals, but it's also hard because as institutions, we have to think about what it means to change. And both Eric and Karen talked about change models and the importance of change models. And as someone who's married to a re-engineering person, by God, do I hear a lot about change models. It seems like one of the most important parts about change models is actually having one. And having one that you as either a department, or heck, I don't care, as an individual faculty member, as a department, as an institution, use and actually keep track of. If you do that, then we have a whole lot of things that can help counteract the lack of accountability that everybody's talked about. Because right now, as a faculty member, there are no sticks if you're not successful with students, and the only carrot is you get an award. And awards are nice, but they don't take you too far. Particularly when there's still the attitude that rigor and quality means you fail a lot of people. At the point we get that when you fail a lot of people, that means you stink as a teacher, as opposed to it means you have great rigor, then we're going to have a change. If we don't do that, now it helps if you're losing students and positions may be eliminated. It helps if somebody figures out the cost-benefit ratio of losing a lot of potentially good students as opposed to keeping them going through. It helps if perhaps you figured out the cost and harassment of having to deal with ABET being mad at you because you have a low retention rate versus fixing it in the first place so you don't have that problem. Okay, so, you know, institutions, we know this, so I'm going to say it fast. Even though there were minor changes and many of them stink, like US News and World Report saying, yeah, at some point we're going to pay attention to the value added. But for the most part, the quality of your institution is based on the quality of your input, not your output. Heck of a way to run a business. If we don't do something, you all are going to be so sorry. Do you really want to be judged by that brand new critical thinking exit test? Because that's what's coming. If we all don't start saying, okay, we know we add value and this is how we're going to figure that out. Yes, congratulations. There is going to be an outcome test that you have not had any input in that will be used to make decisions about your institution. Something you don't want to do. Okay, funder accountability. There is a reason that when we find out something works, and as soon as the external money's gone, we don't do it anymore, because there are no consequences. If the next time you go to NSF or NIH or Sloan or anybody else for money, they say, what's left from the stuff that worked from the last grant? And you say, you don't get money. That would get people to pay attention. The old FIPSI program, I'm so old that I know about FIPSE. Let's see, Karen, you know about FIPSE. Anybody else remember FIPSE? The Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education. They had small cost shares at the beginning, going to large cost shares at the end, with an idea is if your data found it was effective, you were committed to doing it. I never understood why they stopped. So all those things can make a major difference. Those are the big things. But before I stop, I just want to talk about one other thing. Somebody quoted Pogo earlier. We have met the enemy, and they are us. And I'm going to speak just a little bit, not about the letter in PRISM, but rather about the responses that I got when I talked to people about the letter. Because the responses that I got constitute very much an impediment to diversity. And this wasn't people on the street. I was in Baltimore. I didn't go out and say, hello, I'd like to talk to you. But no, these were people by phone, people who were there, people who were like good people. And the responses that I got kind of fit into other things, responses that I've gotten in similar kind of situations. So I just wanted to take a minute to talk about the 4 areas where I got responses. One is not publishing things that may be detrimental to diversity is censorship. Censorship was the biggest comment I get. To which my response is, we make judgments all the time about what to publish and what not. And we do it based on quality, we do it based on relevance, and we do it based on appropriateness to the audience. And I'm asking that the same criteria that we use to make judgments about publishing in general, when it's stuff that deals negatively without evidence and data to diversity, that we think about applying the same standards that we would to a research study or to an opinion piece. The second argument that I got was, but the people who publish it are allies. We love allies. Well, heck, I'm here for free because I really appreciate ASCE and all the stuff that you're doing. And we're doing, I forgot, I've been a member for about 10 years, so never mind. I really appreciate ASCE. And I am an ally to lots of people. And sometimes I make mistakes. And if Yolanda calls me on mistakes all the time, never mind. But if you can't call your allies on mistakes, then it's really hard to be true allies. The third, and all right, I'm telling tales out of school. This was from my beloved husband, whose response was, we need to know these attitudes exist. I was on the phone, I started yelling. Luckily, I was on the phone. I was in Baltimore, he was in Massachusetts. We know the attitudes exist. I think most African Americans are pretty clear that racism exists. Possibly LGBTQ people may possibly be clear that there is homophobia. And heavens knows every woman in this room knows about sexual harassment. In fact, I once said that to my mother, and my mother said, I think every woman in the country has been sexually harassed, except for your Aunt Rona, and I think she's lying. I still can't even speak to Tom about it because I was so upset when he said that. Because when attitudes are kind of given the kind of legitimacy and credibility, then it really becomes more of an impediment. Because it gives people who have those attitudes a kind of, see? And then finally, this one bothered me a lot too because it's so true. Our group gets attacked all the time, and they don't speak up for us. So it's not necessary for me to speak up for them. It's also called AKA, it's not my issue. So sorry, folks, I have to read this. I am reminded of Martin Niemöller's poem. First they came for the communists, but I was not a communist, so I said nothing. Then they came for the social democrats, but I was not a social democrat, so I did nothing. Then they came for the trade unionists, but I was not a trade unionist. And then when they came for the Jews, I was not a Jew, so I did little. And then when they came for me, there was no one left to stand up for me. Eric Jolly says that we won't have true equality until you don't have to be at the table in order to have your issues addressed. He's right. If we all work together, you know, we just might get something done. Thank you. Wait a minute, Becky got to run away.
She tried. She was not successful. You can try, but we got the doors locked.
Okay.
So we're going to have time for a few questions before we move into our next breakout group, but we're going to make sure we end on time. In fact, technically, I think a little early so that people can make their shows. Any comments that people want to make or questions they want to raise with Pat? And please use a microphone, even though I did not.
Well, bad for you then. Amir Jose Macari from Cal State Sacramento. So do you think that this time, this workshop, this report that puts out is going to make a difference? And why or why not?
Good question. And I can't speak for the thing as a whole, but I was in the Florida discussion group this morning, and it was awesome that at the end of an hour and a half, do you all want to talk about it? Okay, all right, all right. At the end of an hour and a half, they had plans for a next meeting. They had strategies for what they were going to do. They had a brand new idea about how to use work study students to increase the number of students who get undergraduate research experiences without extra costs. They already have a meeting planned for ways to better integrate with their community colleges in ways to get more diverse students more effectively through to the university level. And that was in an hour and a half. So yes, if folks are, and I think yesterday was a good preparation and leading up to think about it. So I didn't get in the other state or regional groups. But by gosh, if you guys are doing as much as Florida is, I do have hopes that this one's going to make a difference.
Go Florida!
Pamela, in our group, I volunteered you to be the MOOC for, I said if you could have an instructor that would reach students out there who haven't signed up for engineering, if you were the instructor, if we were scared of online instruction, we talked about, if you were the ones that students saw and they engage with you, I know we'd have more people. That's a side piece about ours. Pat, can you talk more about the Treisman and the teaching spatial and visualization? Just that it's out there, so we're supposed to be surmounting the barriers. And I do feel a little bit frustrated about how we can know, as you said, years later, it's still not a staple to have these facilitated study groups, or what do we do? Do you have a recommendation? I'm especially interested in the spatial visualization. If you can actually teach students and give practice, what's holding us back on that front?
Bev says money.
That's all it is.
Um,
we had it at Virginia Tech.
Bev.
I know.
Okay, so they did the Treisman model at Virginia Tech for, 8 years. And then math decided they didn't have enough money to continue, so they stopped.
Now you are doing spatial visualization.
We're doing the spatial visualization. We'll see how long it lasts.
I mean, part of it is, and this is something from re-engineering corporate change, is the first step is to rethink your budget. That the way we do budgets now, you actually don't have any idea about how much the money that's spent for the Treisman model saves you in extra money. You have no idea how much money the $2,500, I made that up, to teach a spatial visualization course saves you in other areas. So for the first step, I mean, I think a really important step for provosts, for deans, is to think about rethinking how you compute your budget. Look at your budget in terms of what the value added is. You know, there was a program, the Gateway to Higher Education, that I was with in New York, and it had there were a lot of concerns because it cost $1,900 more per student. I mean, it was New York City, and 90% of them were going off to college, but it was $1,900 over the top. What the budget didn't do was look at how much was saved, because in the Gateway programs, you didn't have cops. You didn't have metal detectors. And so that actually, if you budgeted it correctly, the Gateway program actually costs less per student than the regular program, but because that's not how they budgeted it, it was seen as an additional cost. That's what happens with spatial skills. That's what happens with facilitated groups.
You mentioned how NSF has funded a number of research efforts that have discovered or invented the right way to solve many of these problems. I was just talking to Nate earlier today, and he mentioned that their work at Wright State was funded from a STEP grant from NSF. So the question to you is, and then you also mentioned how many times they don't get implemented, or even if they get implemented, people drop them. So the question to you is, how can NSF do better than we have done in the past?
Well, actually, I'd love to do a brown bag with you on that. But,
You're welcome.
okay, until I do the brown bag on it, one of the things that I think is important to do is certainly put in the RFP expectations for what institutionalization is going to be. And sorry, friends, you're going to hate me, institute some more of the cost sharing back in so that the university actually has a dog in this fight. But so, you know, the university has some reason to do this. And the other thing that I think is a really useful thing to do is for current and pending, okay, and not current and pending, sorry, for previous support stuff. So Eric and I have a brochure for you. Eric and I have a new website that's just out. It's called beyondrigor.org. And we have recommendations for program officers. For the results of previous support, make a one-page summary of the results for previous support, including institutionalization, required in the final project report, and use that one page instead of something that the PI writes when you're talking about impact from previous NSF grants. So I think that's a good way to start.
So can you help me give me a
Okay, what we're going to try and do here is, because the breakout group was originally scheduled from 1:30 to 3 o'clock. And at 3 o'clock, we have one of the first vans leaving. So what we'd like to do is go ahead and ask you to kind of mosey your way on into the breakout group now and be back here at about, let's say, 2:40. And then I'm going to ask each group, and I'll give you this, each group to just give us one really important thing that came out of your discussions this afternoon, okay? And that'll be a brief, you got 60 seconds to do it. Okay, so thanks, and enjoy the breakout.